Dr. Nathan Herman, and I'll just recruit others from the cafeteria here. So we'll just say we're going to get going here soon for those that have gotten the refreshments. Great, Robin, if you can help people bring them in. Robin. Just bring, grab. We're gonna get started, folks, and just, we're gonna get started. I think everybody's another whistle. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we've got Dr. Nathan Herman, and the talk is entitled, Can We Make a Senior's Moment a Bad Memory? And Dr. Herman is the Richard Lure Chair in Geriatric Psychiatry at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre and the University of Toronto, and is the head of the Division of Geriatric Psychiatry at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre. He's also a professor of psychiatry in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto. And Dr. Herman's research focuses on Alzheimer's disease and related disorders, pharmacotherapy, studying treatments for cognitive enhancement, disease modification, and neuropsychiatric symptoms. So please give a warm welcome, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I have to admit, I feel a bit like an interloper today. You know, it's like that little annoying guy who crashes the intimate family wedding just so he can get access to the free bar. But I will say that one of the things I've learned in my 30-year career, traveling all over the world, is that there is no big city monopoly on good medical research and excellent medical health innovation. And it's really a pleasure to be here and to crash and learn. So my topic today is, can we make seniors' moment a bad memory? And I do have a bit of disclosures. I work with some of the big pharmaceutical companies. I help them design studies to treat Alzheimer's disease, and we run some of the studies. The vast majority of my research, however, is funded by peer-reviewed funding agencies, which I'll show you and tell you about later. The big drug companies are not interested in my research because I try to repurpose drugs that have been around and off patent for 20 or 30 years. So they really are not pleased with me. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background, and this is hopefully going to be good information for all of you in terms of thinking about aging and what you can do to successfully age. So just a couple of definitions to start. Cognitive impairment, problems with memory, language, orientation, concentration, problem solving, and things like that. Dementia, and this is a big problem because many people in the lay community mix up what the words dementia and Alzheimer's disease mean. Dementia is a group of illnesses that are characterized by loss of cognitive function that's persistent and progressive, and it interferes with activities of daily living. Alzheimer's disease is one specific type of dementia. It makes up 2/3 of all cases of dementia, probably even larger amount when you include the mixed cases. But it is like, you know, talking about the common cold. The common cold has 1,000 different viruses that cause it, but rhinovirus is the most common cause. So dementia is like the common cold. Alzheimer's disease is like rhinovirus. How common is dementia? So we have really excellent data from Canada because we have the Canadian Study of Health and Aging that showed that between 8 and 10% of people over the age of 65 suffer from this illness, 20 to 30% of people over the age of 80, and that tells you right away that aging is the biggest risk factor for developing dementia. About 50 to 60% of people in long-term care institutions, it's actually probably much higher than that, and at least 200,000 people in Canada will be diagnosed today with Alzheimer's disease. So what are the causes of dementia? Again, Alzheimer's disease number one. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But there's vascular dementia, dementia caused by small strokes or large strokes or hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, cerebrovascular disease. small number of individuals will have this very unusual form of disease that takes up a lot of work for those of us in geriatric psychiatry because it involves a lot of behavioral manifestations rather than cognitive impairment. Dementia with Lewy bodies, which is that terrible combination between what looks like Parkinson's disease and what looks like Alzheimer's disease, all mixed up into a much worse illness because these guys have a lot of visual hallucinations. Dementia with Parkinson's disease, alcoholic dementia, and then a whole other list of smaller, less common causes. So what is Alzheimer's disease? As I mentioned, at least 2/3 of all dementias occurs in mid to late life, has a variable course. It can be anywhere from 2 to 15 years. When I started my career, we talked about people with Alzheimer's disease living 6 to 8 years on average after diagnosis. And now I'm seeing people that are living 15 and up to 20 years with the illness, and that's probably for a number of reasons. One, because we're diagnosing the disease much earlier in the course than we did 20 and 30 years ago, and also because we have better care for them. But it is a progressive illness, and death is usually due to the physical deterioration. These people eventually begin to forget how to walk, and they end up being bedbound and develop all the kinds of medical complications that are associated with being bedbound. And then about 1 to 2%, very small number of these individuals, very rare families that have familial Alzheimer's disease, where you see 50% of individuals in every single generation have the illness, and it's an autosomal dominant inheritance pattern. So this is the Alzheimer's Society 10 early warning signs. This is great, very worthwhile sharing with the public because it really gives a nice picture of what the illness looks like. So it talks about memory loss that affects daily functionings, difficulty with familiar day-to-day tasks, problems with language, disorientation to time and place, problems with judgment, abstract thinking, manifesting as misplacing things in daily life, changes in mood and behavior, changes in personality, and loss of initiative. And that last one is very, very important because I focus a lot of my research on apathy, as I will tell you about later. So this is what the normal brain looks like. Don't forget about the colors. The colors mean absolutely nothing. This is what the normal brain looks like, nice and plump. And this is what the Alzheimer's disease with these peaks and valleys. And it's the valleys that you're concerned about because it means that brain tissue has died. There is a continuum between what we call normal cognitive aging, and unfortunately, the older we get, there are things that happen with the way we think and process. We tend to slow down cognitively, but our memories still remain very good, and in fact, if we look at what we call crystallized intelligence actually increases as we get older. Then there's subjective cognitive impairment. These are people that are concerned about their memory, like more concerned about it than sort of the average person. But when you test them, there is no evidence that they have actual cognitive deficits. This is a condition that we're learning more and more about. It may be a harbinger of dementia. These people do have an increased risk of developing neurodegenerative disorders than people that are not overly concerned about their memory. Mild cognitive impairment, you can already test them and determine that they have cognitive deficits, although their activities of daily living are completely intact. Earlier mild dementia is when you develop deficits in your activities of daily living. And of course, we have problems first with instrumental activities of daily living, like using the telephone, doing the banking, turning on the television, and the televisions these days are even more complicated than they were in the old days. And so these are really good tests of instrumental activities of daily living. And then once we get to moderate dementia, basic activities of daily living are beginning to become impaired. By the time you're severe dementia, you're already having trouble with very, very basic activities. You may have more difficulty with things like feeding yourself, with even walking, and that's when you end up heading to end-stage dementia, where, as I said, you'll be bedbound and essentially mute. So what are the risk factors for developing dementia? I already talked about aging, and just to put some figures onto that, the risk of dementia doubles for every 5 years of life after the age of 65. Yeah, I know, that's kind of scary. But having said that, your risk of developing dementia, if you're over the age of 65, in general, is 1 to 2% per year. Genetics. So even forgetting about familial Alzheimer's disease, if you look at regular or sporadic Alzheimer's disease, your risk is probably 2 to 3 times greater if you have a first-degree relative with Alzheimer's disease than if you don't have a first-degree relative with Alzheimer's disease. So there is an increased risk for having a first-degree relative. Education, the more education you have, the less likely you are to develop Alzheimer's disease, and the more likely you are to develop it if you're going to develop it later in life. Head injury is still a bit questionable, even in these days of what you're hearing in the news every day about CTE, so developing dementia as a result of chronic multiple head trauma. There's still a bit of a debate, really, about how important head injury is, but we generally feel that at least a head injury with loss of consciousness, plus or minus the ApoE gene, increases your risk of developing dementia. Depression, very interesting thing. If you've had a depression at any time in your life, but particularly in late life after the age of 65, you are at very high risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. All the vascular risk factors that increase the risk of heart attack and stroke increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. So high blood pressure, high blood sugar, cholesterol, obesity, smoking, and physical inactivity. And then there's the question about moderate alcohol intake. And again, there is some evidence that there's a U-shaped curve, whereas teetotalers have a very high risk, and then heavy drinkers have a very high risk, and that people that have moderate alcohol intake are sort of at the lowest risk. Because of my background as a geriatric psychiatrist, I do not recommend the use of alcohol to protect you from developing Alzheimer's disease. So, how can we prevent dementia? Or is it an inevitable consequence of aging in the Western world? And the answer is it's not. So let me tell you what doesn't work. And the answer is drugs don't work. Nothing you take by mouth in the form of a pill will help you delay the onset of dementia, reduce the risk, or slow the decline. It does not work. And drug companies have spent billions and billions and billions of dollars over the last 20 years to find drugs that will delay disease progression or that will delay the onset of the illness. So nothing works. And there's nothing on the horizon, meaning there will be nothing on the market within the next 5 years that will be able to delay the progression of Alzheimer's disease or delay its onset. Natural health products also, despite what you're going to read on the internet, they do not work. There is no evidence that these work. And these include things, well-known things like ginkgo, omega-3 fatty acids, and I've done research on omega-3 fatty acids, and then these other interesting things like coconut oil and goji berry. They really don't work. When my patients ask me about them, I say, you want to try? Go ahead. They're likely to be safe, but they're not likely to help. So what does work? And the answer is it's the hard things. It's a brain-healthy lifestyle. So what's a brain-healthy lifestyle? First of all, as I mentioned, education is protective. So make sure you keep your kids in school for as long as possible. But if you're an adult, you continue to learn. Wear a bike helmet. And in this area, you wear a bike helmet and you wear a helmet when you ski. And protect your brain when you're involved in activities that there's a potential for brain injury. Optimize hearing and vision. Increasingly good information every year that hearing is intimately related to cognitive decline and worsening cognitive impairment in people that have dementia. So we want to make sure we optimize hearing and vision. Make sure your family doctor is managing your vascular risk factors, the ones I mentioned before, like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, and smoking. Okay, so what really works? If I had to say the one thing that I think is most important to protect you from developing dementia, it's physical exercise. So this is the really hard part. And I give all my patients an exercise prescription. And I tell them, you need to be doing, based on the research, a minimum of 150 minutes a week. And you can divide it any way you like. If you want to do one session of 150, that's fine. If you want to do 3 sessions of 50 minutes or 5 sessions of 30 minutes, it doesn't matter, as long as you're doing a minimum of 150 minutes. And you need to be doing both resistance type exercises as well as cardiovascular type exercises. And the reason for that, as I'll show you in a few minutes, is the suggestion in the research that they may be working in 2 different ways. So I recommend, do your walking, do your swimming, do your bike riding, but also go to an exercise class, do yoga, lift some weights. Those are both really important. I also tell them that there's reasonably good information based on research that there's a dose response, so that the more you do, the better off you are. Mentally stimulating activities, things like crosswords, Sudoku, socializing, conversation. Courses, learning a new language. My colleagues at Baycrest showed quite nicely that learning a new language is actually a very, very powerful intervention to help reduce cognitive decline. Another set of my colleagues have also shown that ballroom dancing, learning how to do ballroom dancing works very nicely, because that, I guess, combines both learning with physical exercise and social engagement. Cognitive remediation. So cognitive remediation are the things that you're finding on the internet these days, like Lumosity. And many of my patients ask about Lumosity because it's available free online. And what I tell them is that, first of all, there is no single cognitive remediation program, despite what you read on the internet, despite what you hear in the news, there is no single cognitive remediation program that has proven consistently to be better than any other cognitive remediation program. The key is to find a program that you enjoy and that you'll keep at. So, for example, one of the big studies that was done on Lumosity showed that while you can improve your scores on Lumosity, it doesn't generalize to any of your activities of daily living. So it doesn't really help show that you've got better memory in terms of your day-to-day life. And that's a big problem with a lot of the other cognitive remediation programs. But I still say it's better than doing nothing, and it is exercising your brain. Mediterranean type diet, less red meat, more fish, vegetables, legumes, nuts, especially walnuts and almonds, and using olive oil as much as possible. So here's some proof that this kind of stuff works. And the first I'm going to tell you about is the PREDIMED study. This was an amazing study, a randomized control trial with several thousand people of the Mediterranean type diet. And what they did in this, interestingly, study is that they had you either have a handful of walnuts or almonds every day or drink 2 to 3 ounces of olive oil. Ugh. Yeah, I know. I don't know how they managed to get people to do that. But in the end, they showed that after an average of 6.5 years, subjects who used this type of Mediterranean diet had a 27% lower risk of developing mild cognitive impairment and a 36% lower risk of developing dementia. Remarkably effective intervention. Here's another really good example of how this stuff works. This is the FINGER study from Scandinavia, 2-year long, actually from Finland. A 2-year-long randomized control trial of multi-domain intervention. So this means the investigators really didn't know what component of the brain healthy lifestyle works, so they said, we'll throw everything at them. And they looked at diet, exercise, cognitive training, vascular risk monitoring in an at-risk population. And they found that significantly greater improvements in overall cognition scores on and specific measures. Interestingly, not memory, though, but other types of specific cognitive measures, and a 31% greater likelihood of cognitive decline in the controls. So those people who were given information about diet, information about cognitive training, but were not actually put through these training programs. So I just want, I don't want people to get overly panicked about this, the silver tsunami or the rising tide, as the Alzheimer's Society of Canada calls it, because the news is not all that bad. The Framingham results that were published just a couple of years ago showed that the 5-year age and sex-adjusted incident rates of dementia are declining significantly and consistently since the late 1970s. So we're doing something in our communities that are lowering the risk of Alzheimer's disease. The rates of most vascular risk factors are also declining, but they do not completely explain the declining incidence of dementia. So we're still not sure why this is. There must be something about the way we provide healthcare in North America, or maybe specifically in Framingham. But there is something that seems to be working, and maybe this rising tide is going to be stemmed at some point. The other important thing to remember is that, and this is a bit of a good news, bad news kind of thing. If we can find an intervention that delays the onset of dementia by 5 years, we're going to cut the prevalence of dementia in half. Now, that sounds really good, but what that means is that you're going to live long enough to die of something else. But again, because we know of the morbidity and the suffering associated with dementia, maybe it's better to die of a heart attack when you're 80 than to die after 10 years of being disabled by Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so since this is a research and innovation conference, I'm going to show you some neat, innovative research stuff. And this is my lab at Sunnybrook. This is our clinical neuropharmacology laboratory. This is my co-director, Krista Langto. She's a a PhD clinical pharmacologist. And I think that we've worked so well together for the last quarter of a century because she provides the science and I tell her what's important from a clinical perspective. So we have had funding from a number of very important and generous agencies like the Canadian Institute of Health and Research, Health Research, the National Institute of Health from the United States, and very importantly for us most recently is the Alzheimer's Disease Drug Discovery Foundation in the US. So the goals of our lab are to optimize the pharmacotherapy of cognition and neuropsychiatric symptoms in dementia, but also in other medical illnesses. We have a very large research group that are focused on looking at patients with coronary artery disease. And we know that people with coronary artery disease, if you've had a myocardial infarction or if you've had congestive heart failure, you are at very high risk of having cognitive impairment and you're at higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and other types of vascular dementia. Similarly, stroke, the rates of cognitive impairment after stroke and the rates of depression and anxiety are very, very high. So these are illnesses that we're focusing on trying to improve cognitive function as well as neuropsychiatric symptoms. We are mixing clinical trials using a lot of repurposed drugs, as I'll show you about in a moment, with searching for biomarkers and to help us understand why some people with Alzheimer's disease become depressed and some people don't. Why some people with stroke develop anxiety symptoms and some people don't. Why some people with coronary artery disease develop cognitive impairment and some people don't. So we're trying to find out why some people have a protection against these kind of neuropsychiatric symptoms and others don't. So here's a smorgasbord of some of my recent research. So this was a publication from last year where we have looked at the largest collection of studies that focus on inflammation. So you know that with Alzheimer's disease, you've all heard about the pathology being related to this protein called amyloid as well as tau. Amyloid and tau, amyloid and tau. That's all you hear. But 25 years of therapeutic research targeting amyloid and tau has done absolutely nothing. Every single trial has failed. So we believe we need to start looking at other therapeutic targets. And what we showed in this study is that there is very consistent research that shows that a number of inflammatory markers are very significantly elevated in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's disease. And we also found, interestingly, one inflammatory cytokine was very strongly correlated with disease progression. And why is that important? So first of all, the first part's important because now we have another target. Rather than amyloid and tau, we can look at inflammatory markers and see if we can develop targets or develop treatments that reduce these inflammatory markers. But the last point that I made about finding this one inflammatory marker that correlates with outcome is because you think about the kinds of outcomes we use in these clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease, things like the mini mental state examination or the ADAS-Cog or other cognitive measures. These are pretty insensitive to change overall. If we had a biochemical marker, a blood test that declined as we treated people, that might show to us that there is more promise to this particular treatment. So we were pretty excited about this paper. Okay, I've spent my last 20 years looking at a drug that kids take, and that's Ritalin. About 20 years ago, we were sitting down and talking about some of the biggest problems that caregivers face when they treat patients with Alzheimer's disease. And we said, you know, apathy, lack of motivation, lack of initiative, the person who wants to sit in a chair all day and do absolutely nothing, the person who will not do his bathing and feeding and dressing, even though he or she still has the cognitive abilities to do it. That is an important behavioral target to treat. And so we did a number of studies to show that the amounts of dopamine in the brain are decreased in patients with Alzheimer's disease and apathy. And so that led us to say, well, what drugs do we have that increase dopamine in the brain? And one of these was methylphenidate. And so we did a very small randomized placebo-controlled trial that showed that this drug looks very promising. We did a second, this would be called a phase 2A study that looked at a much larger patient sample. This was in 60 individuals, randomized placebo-controlled trial that showed the drug works. And now finally, we're in the middle of our third study. This is a large phase 3 study with 250 patients. We're halfway through recruitment, And hopefully, within the next year, we'll be able to present our results. And this may become a standard of treatment for patients with Alzheimer's disease as a symptomatic treatment of not only apathy, but of cognitive impairment. In the second study, we were able to demonstrate that certain measures of cognitive function also improved with the methylphenidate, not just the apathy. So grass for granny. This is obviously, this is ripped from the headlines from the last 24 hours with the approval of medical, not medical marijuana, recreational marijuana in Canada. So we became, about 5 years ago, we became interested in whether cannabinoids might be helpful at treating agitation and aggression in patients with Alzheimer's disease. This is a very difficult area to treat. The drugs that we have that are available are very dangerous, and they're not particularly effective. So we wondered about what kind of literature was out there, and we've done 2 review articles. We published the first review article in the area, and we've just published in March the second updated article. And I can tell you that there is virtually no good randomized placebo-controlled trial using any type of cannabinoid to treat agitation and aggression. So we said, okay, fine. So if it's not out there, we're going to do the work. And we did a randomized placebo-controlled trial that we are going to present the results of next month at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in Chicago. The results, unfortunately, are embargoed, so I cannot give you them. But I am smiling as I go to bed every night. Keep your eye on the news in 1 month from now when they start talking about the results from the conference, because I can tell you there ain't going to be a lot of positive studies that are going to be presented at the conference.
How did you fund that study?
This was funded by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada as well as the Alzheimer's Discovery Foundation. So it was funded by 2 very good peer-reviewed funding agencies. Okay, very quickly. So this is another meta-analysis that we did looking at the effect of exercise on brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a chemical in the brain that actually causes brain cells to grow, even in late life. And what we found in this particular study, again, very briefly, is that you can increase BDNF through exercise, but it looks like it's the resistance training that actually increases BDNF, as opposed to cardiovascular exercise, which probably increases cerebral blood flow. So that's why I said you need to do both kinds of exercise. This I'll tell you very briefly. As I said, we're looking for ways to be able to characterize people that improve versus people that don't improve. And this was an example of our coronary artery disease patients. We did brain scans on all of them, and then we looked to see what markers in the brain show that may predict who is going to get better with exercise versus who is not going to get better with exercise. Lithium builds bigger brains. So this is another meta-analysis that we showed that in patients that are treated with lithium carbonate, which is the standard treatment to treat bipolar disorder or manic depressive illness, patients' brains actually grow after they're treated with lithium. So we wondered whether we could use lithium to treat patients that have had a stroke and increase brain size as well. And that is also currently in press, and so I can't tell you the results. I'm not smiling as much for this one. Can heart surgery improve memories? This is another recent publication that we did. And this looks at a very interesting surgical procedure called transcatheter aortic valve implantation, or TAVI. TAVI is the new wonder child of cardiology and cardiovascular surgery, because what it does, it replaces surgical aortic valve replacement, where they had to cut your sternum open and tear your chest apart and take the heart out and put in the new valve. In TAVI, they replace the aortic valve through a femoral catheter, just like an angiogram is done, just like an angioplasty is done. Remarkable, remarkable surgery. So you can imagine, because it's such a remarkable surgery, they started to use TAVI on the worst patients, the oldest, most frail, most multi-morbidity patients who couldn't tolerate surgical valve replacement. And what they found is that it was remarkably safe, remarkably effective. And so we like this patient population because we obviously expected them to have a lot of cognitive deficits, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. So we began studying them. And again, I'm not going to tell you about the studies we did, but we did this as part of our preparation for the study. We did a meta-analysis of the studies that looked at cognitive impairment before and after TAVI surgery. And what we basically found is that there is no change in cognition whatsoever. When you look at people pre-TAVI and then 6 and 12 months after TAVI, there is no change in cognitive function, so people don't get any worse. And in fact, 3 months later, if you look at the 3-month mark, their cognition actually improves a bit. And that's likely because they're feeling better physically, they have more energy, they can participate more in the testing rather than a direct effect on cognitive function. But the good news, as I said, is that it's completely protective of cognitive abilities. So we thought that that was also important. And I think that's it. Good. I'm done.
Great, thank you so much. So we'll do the same. We'll take questions after the end of the session. And our great talk and our next speaker is Dr. Zeina Kayet. And talk will be on the future of aging with health, dignity, and vitality instead of pain, sickness, loneliness, and dementia. Dr. Zeina Kayet is the future strategist at St. Elizabeth, a health and social impact enterprise with a major focus on home care. In 2017, Zeina was on a secondment from Mars Discovery District, an innovation hub in Toronto, to reshape Health Innovation Center at Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands. At Reshape Center, she was their innovation Sherpa-in-Chief, working on several key initiatives to strengthen the Dutch health innovation ecosystem. So thank you so much for coming.
Great. Thank you. Just so I know, I was intrigued by your questions, some of the gentlemen, and you're speaking on behalf of Bob. Who here is just an everyday citizen from this community? Okay, this is awesome. This is how I feel way more comfortable. And just to know, the reason I'm here, it all happened in a church basement in Elmvale. Her and I were at church on Mother's Day, and we went to the basement for like deviled eggs and, I don't know, chocolate Easter egg and eggs. Anyway, so then Michelle mentioned this day, and I said I'd really want to be here, so thanks for making it happen. Okay, so guys, we're taking a helicopter, and we're going way up. I'm a futurist. I scour the world for signals, and I try to figure out how to translate those to help this precious asset we have called healthcare. And so I'm about the future of health and how do we get Canada there faster, sooner, better, quicker, for the betterment of all of society. But we heard today if 2/3 of the population will be, older adults, therefore the future of health is the future of aging. So I'm going to talk about where the world is going in health. What are some big dislocations, some big shifts? And I want you all to be thinking about, wow, what if that applied to, the problems I'm trying to solve every day in whatever my work or my life is. I tweet incessantly, so I'm on, and I'll share these on Twitter as soon as I'm done, so you'll have these slides immediately. Okay, so who remembers Ptolemy, the mathematician? Yeah, kind of circa 0 BC, a little earlier. He kind of with his math was sure that the Earth was the center of the universe, and it actually didn't move. And he was convinced in that, and all the mathematical models that the sun and all the other planets are orbiting the Earth, that was the dogma, right? For 2,000 years, and that's kind of like, whether you want to say the creation of modern healthcare was 50 years ago, post-World War II, or, 2,500 years ago at the Hippocrates time, we've made the system the center. This thing, and institutions like buildings don't move, right? They don't change for a really, really long time. And the patients are this like unfortunate byproduct, that has to kind of circle around. And so just like Copernicus brought a revolutionary paradigm shift that through math, 1,300 years later, we had it wrong. The sun is the center of the universe, and the Earth is just one of many kind of orbiting. This kind of Copernican shift is what's underway right now. We're in the middle of it in healthcare, and this to me is the game changer, that we're finally designing everything about what we do around the people who have the biggest stake in all of this. And those of us who are in the formal system are one of many in the constellation that's helping, these precious people live and age healthy, among others. And so if you follow Thomas Kuhn's kind of scientific revolutions, where he looked at all these patterns, the Earth being flat versus round, although there's a whole society that still believes the earth is flat. They don't just kind of gradually, like this 1,300 years thing, linearly, like the way healthcare. There's always like a tipping point of major new science that allows the new paradigm, because the old rules just don't fit anymore. Something's not working. And I would submit we have kind of 3 of these triggers happening. So the first, which has always been there, is, society's ability or willingness to pay does not match the demand, right, for all the things we just heard about today. That's always been true. That's been every headline of every newspaper, of every jurisdiction forever, right? But we're really at an acute phase of that, as we've seen in the discourse. Our solution historically was just, through taxation, just keep dumping more money on the system. But scarcity is a good time to innovate. But we couldn't do anything about that until the second big force, which is, this is Eric Topol's book, The Patient Will See You Now. He's a doctor, a cardiologist from Scripps, who's kind of characterized this patient revolution. That you and I and our kids, if they're helping take care of us, have kind of all the cumulative knowledge of the world sitting here. Right? So those other experts who had to train for 15 or 20 years to hold all that knowledge here, it's pretty democratized. We're empowered, and in many other sectors of our life, we figured out how to take care of things, right? So I talk about to my students, when I used to like to book a trip, I'd have to go with my mother to the back of the Sears store, to the travel agency. If my trip was a year from now, I had to order my traveler's checks then to anticipate how much cash I'd be spending, right? Like now, I could have booked my trip right now listening, but I couldn't because I was listening to him and it was awesome. So this is a new thing, right? We've woken up and we are demanding and expecting, let alone you layer, if the bulk of us are baby boomers who have a very different expectation of aging than kind of the generation before them. But the third factor, and that's what I'm going to focus on, is even if we're out of money and we've all woken up and we're going to demand something different, there's now technology to actually do something about it at scale, right? Technology takes the trade-off of cost and what we want, and it brings it down to almost zero when that technology is software. And so just to give you an idea of this, right? So here's 2,500 years of medicine. These are major points from Hippocrates, so microscopy, anesthesiology, x-rays, the World Health Organization in 1948, a major policy innovation, the human genome, etc. Major developments that really changed the equation of how we could approach health and wellness. Really important for some of those mortality statistics we heard. But the one thing that's been common about all of these until about 2008 is kind of when digital came on the scene in healthcare. And you guys remember this whole e-commerce wave and the internet was 99, 98, 2000, where every other sector kind of started to absorb and embrace this new channel for everything. We were about 10 years behind, which is pretty normal for healthcare. And then Canada tends to be 10 years behind everybody else in healthcare. So you now have a software layer that's underpinning all the cumulative progress. Right? All the experience, all the knowledge, all the data can now have an information layer that allows that progress to now scale at a very low cost. That's the heart of what digital does to a largely analog system. So put that all together. This is kind of my framework for the future of health. It's kind of collecting all the signals around the world. I won't get into it. I do a 1-hour version of this normally if it's online. But these major shifts from reactive to not only proactive, but predictive. And I'll show you an example. From a precision that's kind of one size fits everybody, which means one size fits nobody, right? When you give everybody what works for the average, nobody's needs are met. Very crude, quite analog. We designed, medicine around body parts and diseases that we could see at the time that these institutions were created, to highly personalized and much more intelligent. A modality, so where we get services, very institution-centered, come to places like this or to the clinic. That was the orientation, because we had to concentrate all these high capital and expensive and important resources in these places. All that is getting decentralized. From episodic and intermittent, we've designed medicine to kind of come in at the diagnosis point or the treatment point, and all that beautiful space in between is kind of where I left up to our own devices. So all that moves to being continuous, power shifting from the provider to what's now being called people-powered healthcare, right? So it's not that we're in charge all the time, but it's much more of a partnership. And then a whole business model shift from paying for the appointment or the pill to paying for the result, right? So this is a lot of change for a sector that hasn't really had a lot of change at this scale, and it's all kind of happening at the same time. And remember, software scales exponentially, so you now have a current that is going to make this way, way faster than anything we've seen in the past. So some of these shifts, just to show you a little bit. So I'm part of an international network of leading health systems that are trying to modernize formally through innovation, which is blowing up what you're doing now and putting it back together in a way that makes sense for today's needs. So we work a lot with these groups. So Kaiser Permanente, which is a major health system in the US, about the size of Ontario, these guys have to deliver care and do all the things we obsess about, but they've realized, same postal codes, two patients, two different postal codes, same healthcare system. If they're from Compton versus Beverly Hills, completely different outcomes, right? Postal code trumps everything else. So they've invested now in farmers markets in all their high-risk communities, city neighborhood building. They have a primary care plus model that will be published soon by Harvard, where primary care doctors are connected to all the social determinants, and they got incredible results for that. They just invested $200 million in a new financing vehicle for housing. To wait for government to subsidize housing, it's not going to work, right? So new capital sources that they've invested in, and this is a healthcare system. United Healthcare, same thing, housing, transportation, employment as their biggest social determinants, and it goes on. And even Women's College here in Toronto, a big platform of their strategy is to close the income gap, particularly for women, because income drives health, right? So healthcare systems are becoming social care systems because that's where the levers are. Other examples. So imagine this was the symptoms of kind of getting a sore throat and then getting that full-on flu or cold like you talked about. So, public health might have caught that a little early, maybe had some hand washing or made you take the flu vaccine. So maybe we would have caught it. If we missed all that, traditional primary care should hopefully catch it. But the reality is now all of us are creating what I call a digital exhaust. Right? All your activities are now digitized, whether you want it to or not. There's a digital twin of you being created all the time. Your movements, how you talk, how you socialize, where you spend your money, how much you move, blah, blah, blah. So there are now pretty sophisticated ways using artificial intelligence, which is just computers to process decision-making a lot faster and find patterns than we can do using analog methods, to start to do prediction much earlier, not just because it's nice, but there's now business models being created around the value of intervening here for healthcare instead of waiting till the sick care happened, right? Business models that are funded and everything are being kind of tested and evaluated. So we look at all of those. So you'll see quotes like this is the chief medical officer at the company created by one of the guys who cloned the human genome or sequenced the human genome, that the shift of medicine from being a clinical science that uses data to being a data science that's supported by many attributes that clinicians bring to it that are well beyond just the science and the data. So just an example, there's a new word on the street. This will be added to your research program. Digital biomarkers, right? We think of biomarkers as blood, weight, the basic stuff you collect whenever you get, a workup. Data from things like your voice, the speed, the words, the tone, the language mix, the urgency in your voice are now, RCTs are being published of predicting cardiac events, schizophrenia, suicide, and a whole bunch of other things. This data is free to collect, right? The biggest cost to clinical trials is all the infrastructure to go get all that data, right? Your face, just from pictures of children, they can predict genetic disease and stuff like that. So what does that mean for data when all our data is now medical data? Who gets that data? So all these questions are popping up. But digital biomarkers and like voice are getting big. So a couple of other shifts, this shift around decentralization. Okay, so folks, we've built a healthcare system on these analog beasts. Bricks, paper, pens, and the illustrious fax machine. There's a major debate about this right now. There's a hashtag called Axe the Fax. And then Andre Picard, I don't know if you guys read him, he's like my favorite writer in the Globe and Mail, just wrote another op-ed about this. It's all over the place. And so, pick a D. I think earlier we heard the 3 Ds. Who was that? Yeah, that was you. So there's more Ds. Let's add them to our list today, right? All of this is up. It's decentralizing, it's dephysicalizing or dematerializing, demonetizing. Demonetizing means we used to spend money on something that we don't need to anymore. I'll give you 2 examples. $1 MRIs. There's a company called Zebra Medical out of Israel that's now offering those for $1 to do the radiology scan, right, for the whole world. Your whole genome sequence right now is about $1,000. So the Ontario government has had a committee to have a task force, to have a committee to study whether or not we should sequence the population. They've been meeting for like 7 years. It'll be free in the next year because the business models will be created on the data, not on the cost to swab your cheek, put it in a thing, mail it, and put it through the sequencer. So massive shift. So this company, Babylon in the Netherlands, the NHS is a health service for all 65 million people in the UK. They are now partnering with them to deliver most of primary care virtually through an app, right? This takes care of 80% of routine primary care, and then that 20% when you need the in-person takes place in the clinic, and they free up massive capacity. They've scaled this to Rwanda. This company is moving to British Columbia this summer, and we're working with them to deliver primary care at scale in First Nations communities across Canada, because we're in 75% of them. Our First Nations communities will leapfrog the rest of us in having access to primary care on demand. 2 companies in Canada are doing this, Dialogue in Quebec and Maple here in Toronto, founded by an ER doctor in Toronto. World Economic Forum making predictions like the end of the hospital and the future is the home-spital. We say phone-spital. And that was certainly, this hospital is like the UHN of the Netherlands that I spent a year on secondment. This is 15,000 people, the biggest employer in this small community in the Netherlands. And so it's like what Mayo Clinic is to Rochester. Had a futures team like me redoing the whole footprint. They will shut down half of their beds despite a 40% growth in demand because they have an older population and no job growth and no growth, right? Imagine going to your board in your community and say, yeah, we know it's going to go up by 40%, but we're shutting down half the beds because they're moving to a digital first, physical last model, right? Your precious assets here you use for the people who need it, and for those who are able, you deal with in other channels, just like everything else we've done in life. Biggest announcement, when they formed new government in October, they split the Ministry of Health into the Cure Ministry of Health, which is hospitals, and the Care Ministry of Health, which is elder care, community care, and primary care. Took $2 billion out of acute and put it into elder and community care. And nobody was pissed off in the press because it's kind of obvious. So other things in digital therapies, virtual reality. So this is where you wear a goggle and you're immersed in a new world. There's a center at Cedars-Sinai in LA with a Dr. Brennan Spiegel. He's like the U for dementia for virtual reality. All RCTs to show better results as a therapeutic, a digital therapeutic, from immersing people with stress, anxiety, loneliness, depression. And now UHN is studying this for dementia, early stages. But better results, they now think medical school is going to need a new specialty called the virtualist, right? Just like we need clinical pharmacology and all these other things. The Netherlands has innovated on a completely different way to do home care. So no middle people, no coordinators, just let the nurses get in the field and solve what people need without all the chain of command. So my number one project with St. Elizabeth, we're the same size as this organization, the Netherlands Buurtzorg, we're 10,000 people, is to shift the whole home care model in Canada to a self-directed model where care teams make decisions on the ground and go back to why they got into nursing. So that's a big one. And then, other things, Red Cross, postal workers, firemen, EMS drivers now doing home visits, right? Because these business models don't make sense anymore. But postal workers are visiting the same house for 30 years. They know these people. They can do wound care, IV administration, etc. New ways to move people to appointments. So, we always talk about the Uber of healthcare, right? So on demand. Well, Uber is actually now doing Uber Health. So hospitals are hiring them to bring patients to and from appointments because there's so much turnover. Lyft is in Toronto. Ford Motor Company, talk about an industry that has to reinvent itself, is now a healthcare transportation company with a trial in Michigan. So other things, right? If you think of, anybody with a chronic illness that's, sleeps 8 hours a day, that leaves about 6,000 hours a year that they live with their illness and their disease and self-manage. And they're only in the formal medical system for appointments and checkups and labs, a sliver of it, right? So how do we tap that green zone in ways that can bring new resource to healthcare instead of the blue having to do all the work, right? So lots of movement in this area. Kaiser Permanente is now on a model that about 80% of what is currently done in the formal medical system can be self-managed by people in their communities at home for those who are able, right? Think of 80% of the Ontario healthcare budget could be transitioned, right, if we wanted to go there. All the things currently in a doctor's office or a clinic are being democratized into the phone. Urine analysis, breath, eyes, you name it. It's all being done cheap, accessible, good enough to get early data so you don't have to go in and make the appointment. All sorts of ways to track walking and urine and smart diapers, smart wheelchairs, smart bed sheets, to be able to monitor data and collect information all the time instead of at those kind of appointments, right? And we're testing a bunch of them here. And then finally, big shifts around how we interface and get information, particularly for the older population. Using apps and iPads, it's not easy. Voice will be the new way all of us communicate with anything. We won't be texting and touching and typing anymore. So health systems are getting way ahead of this. There's a major program at Kaiser Permanente for voice to be the number one way any information is shared, whether that's charting, patient declaring their symptoms, etc. Amazon is all over this. We're doing a lot of work with a chat bot, so basically a text message that's smart and talks to you with a personality for the caregiver. So somebody mentioned the caregiver. We are all about supporting the caregivers. We have an entire business at St. Elizabeth just for caregivers. Robots in the home. I mean, Japan is 2/3 elderly population right now. Everything we're saying is coming, they're there, right? And they don't have big families. So they've figured out ways, and they have robots not just doing social isolation, but also vacuuming and stuff, new wheelchairs, reinventing the end of life, and more. So I'm just going to skip these so I can get to my point. So look, when software is at the table, like I said, things scale exponentially. And this is the challenge. This is why every health system is calling me, because they're like, Zaina, we don't know what to do with all this change. We still can't do scheduling online. So how are we going to deal with this? Because every one of these companies, who all of you are using all the time, has declared healthcare is either the number one priority or in their top 5. Okay? Walmart will soon buy Humana, and they will be fully in the elder care space, primary care space, etc. So whether we as a formal health system want to get our act together, they're going to go there. They're going to go there with value propositions that are good enough. Right? If my choice is no care, or I can get $9.99 a month for all my health care from Apple, which is coming, what am I going to do? right? So either we're going to partner with these folks, or we're just going to kind of sunset away a lot of what we think we're trying to do, and then that's going to take over. And we're seeing that with all these examples. So the future of healthcare is innovation, and I encourage you to embrace these methodologies for innovation. And we're going to go through a workshop this afternoon to put you to practice in that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Wonderful talk. Our next speaker is Dr. Hugh Kellum, who will be speaking about the future of aging with health, dignity, and vitality. That was you. And so talk up here is using OTN to facilitate home visits. And Hugh Kellum is the Manager of Education and Curriculum at the Ontario Telemedicine Network. Hugh has 10 years of experience teaching best practices for virtual care to healthcare professionals across the province. He completed his PhD in education at the University of Ottawa, where he focused on the use of online and mobile technologies for teaching, learning, and evaluation. Hugh's current role at OTN focuses on implementing virtual care curriculums into Ontario colleges and universities, as well as how to develop online communities of practice for the identification and dissemination of practical virtual care tools. Thank you, Hugh.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks to ROMP for inviting OTN to be part of the conference, and it's a pleasure to be here with such dynamic and interesting speakers, certainly during the morning. So, research and innovation. We were just talking, actually, Dr. Wells and I this morning, about some of the early days of telemedicine, and I think OTN's done a really good job of innovation over the years. When I started, I mean, the video screens were about as big as these posters, and it was a very bulky system. Now we have home video visits, which I'm going to be talking about today. We have telehome care, e-consult, a wide variety of tools. Where we maybe have dropped the ball a little bit is on the research component. So we've been talking for years about getting curriculums into universities. How can we develop practical tools and case studies to help spread telemedicine? And then also just looking at how to partner with research organizations. So I'm happy to say that's something I'm really going to push in the coming years. So hopefully we can, if you're listening, have some ideas for research and partnerships. I'm definitely listening. So no disclosures, except that I do work for OTN. So I changed it to lecture objectives. I had learning outcomes like Samir had, but I thought I'd soften it a little bit with the objectives. So we'll look at home video visit overview. We'll look at a case study of a virtual geriatric care. It's not home video visits, but it'll give us an idea of some of the OTN programs. We'll look at examples of virtual geriatric care in North Simcoe, Muskoka, and then some other geriatric initiatives that OTN has across the province. So video visits. So this is a quote that our CEO, Ed Brown, uses quite a bit. Intimacy in bringing care to patients versus bringing patients to a healthcare setting. And two of the themes we've really heard today is how important it is to have patients in the home, or how it can be important. And I've certainly listened to Samir. When we saw the patient that he was showing, he was telling me that when he went in, he used to do home visits. And when he went into patients' homes, he would see the medications they were taking, the supports they have at home, what the environment is like, how mobile they are around their home as well. So that's something that definitely home video visits can help with. Now, I'm not so sure about the technology portion, having a daughter who's in university and a son in high school and dealing with texting and video games all the time. I'm surprised that I'm saying that technology can increase intimacy, but we think maybe it can with home video visits for sure. So what it is it's leveraging the private and secure network that OTN already has, and it's two-way video calling, which allows the patient to connect with their healthcare provider. It's free for patients, and it can be appropriate for a wide range of visits, and obviously not just saving the time, but also costs, and also just the comfort that it brings to the patients as well. So, and this is, if you go on YouTube actually and search for OTN home video visits, you can watch a short video that we had produced that helped to promote it. So the overview of home video visits for providers, they'll be able to visit with anyone in Ontario in and outside of healthcare settings, privately in security, and it just uses a simple invitation feature. So right now, I know we were talking a little bit about the difficulty of scheduling online. OTN's been doing it for many years. It's still difficult. It's still a very, very onerous process. But this way, you can just initiate the video visit request with your computer with a secure email sent to the patient. The patients or peers receive the video visit information and can participate from a wide variety of devices, so certainly PCs, iPads, iPhones, Android devices, and they can do it wherever they are. And we've certainly had a wide range of physicians that are also using iPads and phones on their end as well. So again, it's a very flexible service. So how do we initiate a video visit? These are the wide variety of OTN Hub services that we have. We do have a really good OTN directory where you can find host sites and specialists. But what we've done is we have actually simplified when you first log in as a provider to the OTN Hub. You can choose to connect with a patient at home or to make one of our traditional video calls. If they connect with a patient at home, all they have to do is put in their own email, and then it brings it up to who they want to connect to. And you can invite up to 10 guests. You just add the guest's name and their email address. They just have to put in a bit of basic information if it's a clinical event or educational event, how many patients are there. And then they can either dial them immediately by pushing the dial button, or they can actually schedule it using a calendar feature. So for people who have used Encompass, which is our regular scheduling software, this is a huge leap forward because it makes it so much easier to schedule and manage those appointments. And then for the provider, it goes into their calendar in the OTN Hub. So I know Ed Brown is always saying that our CEO, he wants things to be simple, easy for providers to use. So I think there are challenges, but I think we're definitely getting closer with the new technology and home video visit. So this is sort of our sell sheet that we have where we talk about all the different benefits of home video visits. So certainly they are very convenient, so that you can easily connect with either patients or colleagues for learning events and meetings as well. It's flexible, so you can send the invitation to anyone. So while the sender has to have an OTN Hub account with OTN, all of the sendees or the receivers do not have to have an account. So they don't have to be OTN Hub members. They don't need to download anything. They can just click on the link and test their system and then join the call. It's supposed to be simple, so conduct video visits right from your OTN Hub video console. And it's secure, and this is really the big one. I mean, a lot of people we are hearing are using Skype or some other technologies, but OTN is the one video service in Ontario that's really recognized for all of its privacy and security standards. The other thing I would add too here is value. So I mentioned what Samir was talking about seeing the patient in the home, but we also have heard about some pilot projects from Baycrest and good examples of physiotherapists videoing in and making sure the patients are doing their exercises properly. Occupational therapists getting a tour around a patient's home to see, where are the barriers, where are the stairs, can they use their walker in their home. So some really valuable things when we can actually connect with those patients at home. So some significant results. These are, again, a slide that we use at OTN to show a variety of services, and you can certainly see some really big numbers on our regular network. We had actually over 800,000 by the time the year was over in clinical events, 150,000 or over learning events by the end of the year. But the one that struck me was there were already over 18,000 clinical home visits this last year, and we're expecting this to double each year going forward. So this is already a service that's very well established with thousands occurring each year. So we'll look at a case study just to show you a little bit of a workflow that exists. Now, this is not a true home video visit, so it's video visits into a long-term care home. So a lot of the ideas keeping the patients in their home setting. It's not using the software, it's using our traditional software, but you'll sort of see how it mimics a real-life appointment. So here's the situation where 2 nurse practitioners from Royal Victoria placed in 8 long-term care homes. And there's only 1 geriatrician for the entire community. Patients were regularly traveling to see the geriatrician, but by providing consultations by virtual care or telemedicine, keeps the patients in their home environment. And not only did this make sense as far as time and costs, but it also prevented escalating behavior and potential transfers to the ER. The nurses felt it would be great benefit, and the geriatrician agreed to come on board. So how it works on the day of the scheduling the call, the long-term care home does all of the scheduling, which is great. They send in the patients. The telemedicine coordinator creates the Encompass Clinic event and books the appropriate space. And then the events are scheduled using our Auto Connect feature. So all the video conferences just connect automatically with the systems on the day of the appointment. So on the day of, the resident undergoes an extensive pre-assessment by the nurse practitioner and then is present when the consultation takes place with the geriatrician. The patient referral form and all of the investigations are faxed. So we're still faxing, as we say, by the referring site. And then the encounter continues with the examination and assessment components. So I just wanted to illustrate how a lot of the workflow, we're trying to, show physicians that the workflow doesn't necessarily have to change, but it can definitely be of great value for the patients. And how has this program expanded? Well, a year ago, it was just with Royal Victoria and Wood Parks Care Centre, and now there are actually another 6 or 7 of the long-term care homes that are utilizing this program. So some other things in North Simcoe, Muskoka in virtual care, and these are all home video visits. So Dr. Chang at Collingwood General is using using it for long-term care residents for initial consults and follow-ups. Dr. Alyssa is connecting with Georgian Manor for primary care visits. And we're also seeing a lot more long-term care homes using home video visits for family visits. So when family members are not able to attend the appointment, they can join by home video visits. So some real value there for the providers as well. Some other geriatric virtual care, we have partnerships with PACE partners are using it. We've also heard a lot about the eConsult group, so certainly it was fascinating to hear all of their good work. And then there's also some weekly case conferencing with multidisciplinary mobile teams as well. So lots of interesting work going on. So a couple of other OTN geriatric initiatives and partnerships across the province. And one, and it's Samir Sinha is actually the lead on this, and I'm on the committee with him, is the Ontario Geriatrics Learning Centre. So for those who haven't heard or seen it, it's geriatrics.otn.ca, so geriatrics.otn.ca. This is a series of 24 videos that we produced sort of in the TED Talks formats. They're all about 45 minutes to an hour long, and they each have specific topics with expert geriatricians across Ontario. So topics like frailty, dementia, falls, driving, a wide variety of topics. So I would invite people to go and look. It's a free service to go and look, and we're going to be redeveloping the site in the coming year and providing a lot of other videos and information there as well. If you ever have any questions or want to learn more about OTN, we certainly have our website, which is public, but also the training website, which I used to manage, training.otn.ca. It has there's a public access, all of our resources, everything you need to know about OTN and training is there on that website. So it's of great value as well. And finally, and our webcasting center, so it's webcast.otn.ca. That's where we have a lot of great open educational events, so you're welcome to go on there. So I like to show the public sites so that people can access those as well. And lastly, we heard from the Jerry Medris group, and another initiative we're doing educationally is we're looking at building communities of practice across Ontario. So as they expand across Ontario, we're going to have a portal with educational information for them, not only how to use the service, but best practices, and we're going to connect the clinicians by video to share their experiences as well. And I think that's it. So thanks very much for your time.
Great, thank you. And just want to remind everyone as well that these sessions are being live streamed as well. They can be, I just tweeted out the link, but you can see it here as www.romponline.com and it's /events, but I've tweeted it out otherwise. So we'll just move along to our next speakers actually, Dr. Jennifer Fawcett and Dr. Shelby Wirtz. The discussion will be wellness in the older adult. In older adulthood. And Dr. Jennifer Fawcett is a chiropractor and owner of Bayside Wellness. And prior to pursuing her career as a chiropractor, Jennifer graduated first-class standings from Lakehead University with an honors Bachelor of Kinesiology degree and a minor in gerontology. She also acquired certificates in dementia studies and palliative care. Through her experiences, she has gained a unique insight into the rehabilitation process. She continues to expand and refine her clinical skill set in order to provide the best care possible for her patients. And Dr. Shelby Wirtz is a naturopathic doctor. Her medical training includes a focus on preventative medicine as well as using safe and effective techniques to restore health to your body. She loves working with the active senior demographic in our area who are inspiring her to remember to take care of herself so she too can be healthy and active in her 80s. So I'll welcome them both up to the stage.
Thank you. This is my entire PowerPoint, so try to keep it simple. I'm really excited for the opportunity to talk about wellness in older adulthood, and I'm disappointed to see that our friend who was asking about falls has unfortunately left the room for a moment, as that's what I will be discussing today. As Dr. Lisi mentioned, Southern Georgian Bay obviously has a higher than provincial average for our aging population, and I think we all can agree that's because we have a wonderful retirement location here. Interesting statistics or shocking statistics are that approximately 30% of all seniors will have at least one fall each year in Canada. And 1 in 4 of those falls will result in injury. Falls account for approximately 85% of injury-related hospitalizations for seniors. So these are major statistics in the demographic that we're seeing here in the hospital. And as one of my colleagues was saying earlier, this is creating some issue too, because if 85% of those injuries are hospitalized, are we seeing them go on bed rest during their stays here at the hospital? And how is that impacting them for future falls? Because if we're seeing that physical change when we put them on bed rest, like that 5% of bone density loss, are we losing even more strength and stability and increasing even more those risks of falls? The statistics are significant and they're increasing dramatically. These stats are a little bit old, but just in 5 years between 2003 and 2008, injuries due to falls increased by 43%. Even more concerning, deaths due to falls increased by 65%. Clearly, we should be concerned for our senior patients, but we should also be concerned about those who are caring for them and our healthcare system, our local hospital, and the people that are taking care of these patients. Seniors who are hospitalized often remain in the hospital for an average of 10 days longer than those hospitalized for other causes. So that's, again, where these financial burdens are coming from. Over $2 billion a year in direct healthcare costs for falls alone. Nearly 40% of seniors who are hospitalized as a result of a fall are placed in long-term care facilities. Again, this is causing, a lot of stress for those patients, but it's causing a lot of stress for the family who are supporting those patients, and finances too. So we need to talk about, what's contributing to this, how can we support these patients, and is there prevention that can be done? So contributing factors from a physical standpoint are chronic and acute healthcare conditions, balance or gait deficits or strength deficits, sensory deficits, so hearing and vision loss, and inadequate nutrition and hydration has also been shown to have a significant impact on a patient's or a senior's risk of fall. Additionally, falls often lead to negative mental health outcomes. So some of the things that were discussed earlier today, that loss of autonomy, isolation, social withdrawal, confusion, immobilization, and depression, those factors play a very important role on our senior demographics' risk of fall and their overall health. And one of the topics I wanted to discuss was fear of falling, as that's a big piece that I see in my practice as a manual practitioner, someone who's helping people functionally. And obviously this fear is understandable. Look at the statistics, right? 30% of every senior are having at least one fall a year. Of course, these people are concerned, and why that question I think was presented earlier. There's, a perfect example of a gentleman who knows the stats. He's educating himself, he's doing these things, and he's very concerned at how this may impact the longevity of his life. So overestimating our risk of fall often causes seniors to withdraw from physical activity, social outings, and I'm sure you can understand this can negatively impact their overall health, because if they're not exercising because they're scared to fall, if they're not going out and doing those things, we're seeing declines in their mental health and their physical health, which is putting them at a higher risk for fall. On the other hand, which is something that I see often, is the underestimation of risk to fall. And I think that's because we live in this wonderful community where a lot of active seniors are coming to retire. So I treat many seniors who ski all the time, who bike all the time, who hike all the time, play tennis. And it is fantastic to see that demographic still being active. But are they also being cognizant of when we are seeing some physical decline, when there may be overdoing some of those physical activities that could be putting them at a risk for fall, right? So I have many patients in my practice who are over the age of 80 who still ski 5 days a week, which is great and certainly encouraged, but important to provide that education on what are some signs of seeing fatigue? What are some other factors that I may be able to pick up on that could impact a fall while they're out on the ski hill or while they're out cycling or hiking? So I think in many population or other communities, we're seeing sort of an overestimation of their risk of fall. But in this community, we're also seeing a lot of underestimation, because we're lucky to have a lot of seniors who are very active, but we also have to make sure that we're being cognizant of when do we need to tone down that physical activity, how much skiing in the day is appropriate, what are the things that we should be watching for, what are some other exercises we can do to complement those sports that they're interested in to make sure they stay strong and stable and don't have a fall. So as allied healthcare professionals, especially manual therapists like myself, we're often the front line. And we can really help in recognizing these factors before a fall occurs. And we can help drastically reduce a patient's risk of falling by providing some support to those physical risk factors, providing some education, and recognizing when a referral is necessary. So in my profession, some of the things that I aid in is mobility, strength, balance, and flexibility. So providing my patients with rehabilitation programs, targeted exercise programs for allowing them to continue to be active. On this image here behind me, some really important statistics. Seniors who will take an active action in having higher challenge balance exercise, so 3+ hours a week, had almost a 40% reduction in falls. So that's not a lot of time, and these exercises that we're referring to, they're not overly challenging. They just have to involve some specific key elements that are related to balance and strength. Average exercise can decrease by more than 20%, and even low challenge balance exercises less than 3 hours a week can reduce it by 10%. So from my standpoint, helping people to make sure they're not in pain, helping to make sure that people are functioning well, supporting any soft tissue or joint irritation, helping to make sure that those referrals are happening. When my patient comes in and I see, hey, there's some noticeable hearing loss here, there's some noticeable visual change happening, maybe a fall happened, helping to make sure that they're rehabilitated properly and supporting them well so that we can really sort of recognize those risk factors and help our community from having these types of injuries that place them in the hospital. Again, eating well and hydration are another piece that Shelby's going to talk about more. And I just wanted to sort of finalize by saying that fall prevention is certainly a multifaceted approach that requires the support from many different disciplines in our community. We're really fortunate to have healthy, active aging population here, and it's important that we continue to learn how to support them and collaborate in this community to help reduce that impact on seniors' quality of life and our healthcare system.
Thanks, Jen. Naturopathic doctors are focused on a good quality of life. And it's really great to be in this community because that's exactly why so many seniors have moved here. They want that quality of life, and it makes it really fun to work with a lot of the seniors here. And that's my slideshow. Because it's quick and snappy, right? Right? So we do want lots of slides. So considering how falls can greatly impact quality of life, there's so many topics we can talk about when it comes to helping seniors and the things I do address every day, but I thought following Jen on this would be great. So a couple ways that we will help seniors and things to consider when we want to prevent falls. One thing is vitamin D and pain medications, opioids. So opioids such as morphine, oxycodone, hydrocodone, they're really strong pain medications. Some studies have shown that the lower someone's level of vitamin D is, the more opioids they will need. And the opioids can increase risk of falls the way they affect reflexes and balance. So one thing we can do to help is let's test vitamin D, let's increase those levels, and then perhaps if that needs to be increased, then the patient can work with their prescribing physician to adjust the level of opioids that they're using. Anemia. Iron and B12 deficiencies are both known to affect lightheadedness and muscle weakness, which can then increase risk of falls. B12 deficiency can also cause a sensory problem with position and sense of vibration, which is going to affect gait, and that can lead to falls. Two possible causes of B12 deficiency could be dietary, but it could also be a common deficiency created by medications such as metformin, which is used for diabetes, or proton pump inhibitors, which are used for reflux and heartburn. Memory. So with this, there's many links made between short-term memory or working memory and the risk of falls. And for sure, one thing that we'd be recommending is everything Dr. Herman mentioned with the brain-healthy lifestyle. All of those items were great. One thing that I found that was different, though, is that I did find one study on PubMed that said that recall of object locations was significantly better with omega-3 fatty acids versus placebo. Sleep. There was a study done with over 3,000 men, average age of 75, and though it was noted that those with short sleep duration or poor sleep quality were at greater risk of recurrent falls when they were followed over a full year. So sleep's really important. Dehydration. Dehydration comes up a lot on lists when you're trying to figure out what causes falls. It's a cause there. So hydration is very important, and most people I speak with are not adequately hydrating with water and other hydrating beverages. So that's something that I address with everyone, and it tends to worsen with age. There's many people who only take a glass of water when they're taking their pills in the morning and again in the evening, and we rely a lot on hydration. So naturopathic doctors can help by testing blood levels, vitamin D, iron, B12. We can recommend effective ratios of the omega-3 fatty acids I mentioned. Consider nutrient deficiencies associated with either their dietary intake or looking at their medications that they're taking. Help with improving sleep quality, I help with everybody, I find. Most people who come in, how are you sleeping? Not well. So that's a big one. Recommend easy ways to improve hydration. And I mention easy ways because truly this is a habit. Habits take time to change. So it's not simply drink more water, drink more tea. It's about how we're going to make this work without having to go to the bathroom all the time. Make dietary recommendations to reduce inflammation. This is the cornerstone of what naturopathic doctors do. It's nutrition and predominantly through diet. And what we want to do is we want to reduce inflammation, which will then facilitate protocols that are being set by practitioners like Dr. Jen and family medical doctors. And this is something that's really important to understand, is that naturopathic medicine is complementary. It's not alternative. We're not trying to replace your medical doctor. We are trying to be part of a team that helps the patient for best patient care. And ideally, if we're all working together, and if with our focus being on prevention, hopefully we can make a little dent into that $24 billion healthcare increase cost that Dr. Sina has predicted by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Ann Engel, and her talk will be on the approach to delirium at Collingwood General Marine Hospital. And Dr. Ann Engel is a family physician that has been practicing in the Collingwood area since 1985. Dr. Engel has special interests in geriatrics and palliative care, and she is a founding member and former chair of the board of the Hospice Georgian Triangle. Dr. Engel was also the former chief of staff of Collingwood General Marine Hospital and is the current physician lead on Order Set Project and Medical Quality. So thank you, Dr. Engel.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you talking about geriatrics today. And I've really been delighted to hear the eminent speakers that we've heard already today. I have no funding or commercial interests to disclose. I'm going to tell you about an initiative taken on by Collingwood medical staff this year to reduce delirium. To put it in context, I will briefly outline the work done by the hospital that preceded it. I have just a few slides, and you will see that I have put very little on them, just enough to mark the main points, so it's okay to let your eyes wander from the screen while you just listen. Delirium is an acute disturbance of mental function caused by one's physical condition. A person with delirium can have difficulties with such things as sensory perceptions, paying attention, and organizing thoughts. Seniors are particularly prone to delirium. It is unpleasant for the person. It can put that person and others around them at risk of injury, and it makes hospital stays more complicated and longer. I was meant to have the pretty slide on while I was telling you those things. That's a reference for the study. A recent study of seniors in Canadian hospitals found that 1 in 8 developed delirium after an 8-hour emergency department exposure. Patients with delirium had a length of stay 4 days longer than patients without delirium. In 2010, our hospital began routine screening for delirium in patients having hip surgery. In 2015, screening was expanded to include patients in the ICU. Because screening doesn't by itself improve care, there were discussions about improving management. The next step was a nursing standard of care for delirium was developed, and it was implemented in 2017. At the same time, screening was extended to all admitted patients over the age of 65 and others who were flagged by their risk factors or presentation. The management of delirium was an agenda item in physician department meetings, and delirium was an educational focus at a Medical Staff Association meeting in March of last year. This year, the screening process was improved based on feedback. The first improvement was to bring the screening tool and the nursing interventions together within the nursing documentation so that one process flowed into the other for the frontline nurses. The second improvement allowed our numbers to be captured electronically so we do not have to rely on manual chart audits to get data. The medical staff discussions in 2017 appeared to be helpful as far as they went. Let's take a moment and step back and think about the process of quality improvement. Improving implies changing. Change requires effort. Change requires focus on the thing that requires the effort. The number of physicians potentially involved in the prevention and treatment of delirium here is at least 60. And there are dozens of physical conditions that contribute to delirium. So if you've got 65 busy people you want involved in change and 65 potential scenarios to approach, it's hard to get focus. And it would seem that a lot of words are going to be expended and nothing much is going to happen. We need to focus effort on one thing at a time. Nursing interventions address a number of environmental and sensory contributors to delirium, and for our physician project we chose to address medications. We are taking 2 actions. Firstly, we went through our physician order sets and removed certain items. For those in the audience who are not familiar with this term, an order set is a pre-prepared document listing the items a physician is likely to choose from to treat a particular condition, organized in a logical sequence containing checklists so we don't omit something when we're distracted, and giving us the ease of using checkboxes instead of writing out all the words by hand. Certain medications on our documents that can be triggers of delirium were removed, so they are not ordered by checking a box. If the patient really needs to have one of these medications, it can still be written in. This was done through our medical and surgical order sets, and this work was completed this spring. The second thing we are doing is looking at medications that may have been prescribed for the patient at home, may have been obtained by the patient over the counter, or may have been started in hospital. Again, a word of explanation for those of you who are not physicians. You may wonder why we don't just eliminate the use of bad medications. The tricky thing is that medications are both good and bad. Some of the bad actors in delirium are highly recommended for the treatment of other conditions. And sometimes it's the stopping of a medication that has caused the delirium. So the skill and judgment of the physician are critical to sorting through these issues and maximizing outcomes. As I've mentioned, change requires focus and effort. And the goal in this case is not to create change in one thing, but in a condition with multiple potential factors. The goal is to have awareness of several facts front of mind and ready to translate into action at the relevant moment of care. Sharing of information has its limitations. Physicians, along with many other people, I am sure, are already subjected to bombardment of information. Bombarding them with more may not accomplish much. We expect they already have much of this information, but it just isn't front of mind at the moment that a dilemma is requiring attention. Being engaged in working with information, for example, being part of planning this project, is a better way for one to incorporate information, but we couldn't think of a practical way to do this with a large group. So 3 of us got together to plan, and the essence of creating the awareness we want is still information sharing, and we opted for a very simple method. It's information shared over a period of time with focus on one small bit at a time. We are sharing a tip of the month every month for the coming year. We opted to send out our tips on paper, not email. Each month we are sending a message to each physician in the relevant groups about one medication to think about in delirium. And we include a little graphic that we hope will catch the eye and slow down the passage of the piece of paper from the mailbox to the wastebasket. And we post the message beside the mailboxes for a week. We started by discussing our own opinions of what we thought were the top offenders. Then we compared our list with a published summary, which it matched, and we started producing our tips. Here is an example of a tip of the month. I can't share any results because we've only just begun. We don't even know what our baseline delirium numbers were because, as I said, we've only just started to get data capture, and the numbers are starting to come in. It will be interesting to see if physicians find the tip of the month helpful. But I've already had 2 people come up and say, that was really good. It would be very satisfying if we were to see an impact on our numbers. Maybe we will, and maybe we won't. Delirium is multifactorial, and whether this project changes our numbers or not, we know there will be more work to do on delirium. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Engel. So our last speaker is Dr. Sidhu, and the topic will be geriatric assessments in the ER. And Dr. Sidhu currently practices geriatric medicine in Hamilton and is pursuing her master's degree at McMaster University in healthcare administration. She actually also comes up to our family health team and does a geriatric clinic. Her research interests include pain management, and she has been working with seniors to safely use cannabis to help their pain, as well as improve the quality of life. Dr. Sidhu.
Thank you for having me. So this talk will not be on cannabis in the seniors, but you guys can approach me with any questions if you have any questions about that topic. What we're going to talk about is geriatric assessments done in the emergency room. I'm going to be presenting some research that's done out of McMaster, and I'm hoping to bring that research in context here in Collingwood. I do not have any disclosures. So as all of you know, an emergency visit for an older patient is a sentinel event. Emergency visits are known to have adverse outcomes for patients, and those patients that have emergency visits or frequent emergency visits are known to have repeat emergency visits. So the research topic that we did was how to reduce some of the ER visits from older patients. So by doing this research project, we wanted to provide a geriatric assessment done shortly after the ER visit, and we wanted to see if that would reduce subsequent ER visits. So the intervention was that the patient would be seen in the emergency room, and then it would be triaged by a geriatric emergency nurse, also known as a GEM nurse. So the nurse would triage and determine whether this patient would be appropriate for a urgent geriatric visit, and then before the patient would be discharged, would provide them information with this urgent geriatric clinic, and then the patient would be seen within 1 to 2 weeks of their emergency room visit. And this is different because generally what happens is that the patient will be discharged and then either discharged back to their general practitioner or will be referred to geriatrics, and that can take anywhere between a month to even 6 to 9 months before they're seeing a geriatrician for a comprehensive assessment. So some of the results, keep in mind this is, we've just started this project, and so the initial preliminary results are from a very small sample size. The patients were able to get a visit within 1 to 2 weeks of being in the ER, and average age was about 84 years old. And then some of our interventions included stopping medications, submitting forms to the ministry, LIN applications. Some of that was already done in the emergency room or by the GP, but for those that didn't have it done, we were able to facilitate this. So in September to December 2017, we did see that 14% of patients over the age of 65 in the Juravinski emergency room here in Hamilton returned to the emergency room within 30 days of the visit, which was an overall reduction. And that number continues to decline as we are now getting more data with our urgent clinic. So some of the limitations of the study was that it was such a small sample size, but we are seeing more consistent results now with patients being, with a decreased amount of patients being seen in the emergency room after the comprehensive geriatric assessment was done. Another limitation is that not everybody knows what is in a comprehensive geriatric assessment, and for an academic institution, some of the trainees did have some difficulties with performing the comprehensive geriatric assessment. So overall, this project, this QI initiative that we've started did show that targeted outpatient comprehensive geriatric assessments may be an effective way to delay or reduce repeat emergency room visits. So now that we kind of have this data and this knowledge, how do we bring it back to our local community here? So I had to do a little bit of digging and some research to know what the practices go on here, and I was able to figure out that patients are either admitted to the emergency room or they're going to be discharged. And before being discharged, we do have a transition to home service that does help with discharge planning. So they are a good team as they use screening tools that are based on, and the screening tool is based on frailty, number of emergency visits, social isolation, and cognitive impairment, and that helps us identify high users. Once we've identified high users, we can refer them to health links, which is more of a philosophy, as Angela, our healthy aging nurse, discussed with me yesterday, than an organization. And health links helps facilitate and navigate patients to the appropriate services. So we don't have a GEM nurse here in Collingwood, but that doesn't mean that we can't identify high-risk patients or those patients that are coming to the emergency room quite frequently. So if a patient is coming into our emergency room and we have been able to identify them using the screening tools that we have in place already, we can refer them to our healthy aging nurse that's part of our family health team, occupational therapy as well as physical therapy, health links, as well as our falls programs. We have the integrated regional falls program, Stay on Your Feet, and Building Balance, just to name a few of the falls programs that we have here in the community. We have community mental health, OTN, which we've discussed today, as well as me, your local geriatrician. So in April 2017, I started coming here once a month. It's usually 1 to 2 days a month, and I come here and I do comprehensive geriatric assessments, and they're based from the referral from the general practitioner. So what is a comprehensive geriatric assessment? It is a multidimensional, multidisciplinary diagnostic tool. We gather information on their psychosocial, their past medical history, their functional capabilities, as well as their limitations. It has been proven to be an effective tool in slowing the rate of institutionalization, meaning that it slows the rate of patients going to long-term care, improving their function and overall mortality. So what's the data on doing comprehensive geriatric assessments in the emergency room? So we know that it is beneficial, but is it beneficial in every setting? So the current evidence for the CGAs done in the emergency room, there was, and there's a few systematic reviews, but the one that I included here was from 2011, and it showed that overall there was no firm evidence that CGAs done in the emergency room have any effect on mortality, institutionalization, readmission rates to the ER, on function, cognition, and quality of life. So where does that leave us? So what we need to really focus on is how to disseminate this knowledge around the tools that we can use in the emergency room. So while CGA might not be the most feasible and might not be most efficient to do in the emergency room, we have to develop strategic planning, a committee to decide on what kind of tools are effective in the emergency room to fundamentally decrease the number of patients that are coming into the ER and repeating and coming again and again. So our next steps are to develop a committee, and we, Kevin touched upon this briefly about how we are, meeting as a group. We're meeting, and it's interdisciplinary, meaning that we're combining different services, working together to develop strategies on how to build on tools that we already have, build on services that we already have. Talking to the team yesterday at the clinic, I wanted to identify barriers, and one of the barriers that were identified, that we have all these services here in the community, but there's not a lot of communication and integration between these services. So that's one of the barriers that's been identified. So maybe we can work on that and maybe raising awareness of what services services are already here in our community, tapping into those resources, having discussions collaboratively, and then going forward. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, we need to increase our budget, we need to bring in a GEM nurse because a GEM nurse reduces frequent ER visits. Let's tap into our resources that we already have to accomplish the same goal. So I'm finished.
Great, thank you so much. So I'll open it up for some questions from the audience for the last group of speakers.
This is for Dr. Herman. It was interesting that Dr. Wirtz later brought up sleep. You have just about studied everything. Have you not considered sleep at all?
So yes, I have studied sleep as well. And sleep is a very important component of mental health, and particularly health related to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. There's increasingly good data that suggests that amyloid is actually cleared during sleep. And if you don't sleep, you're not clearing amyloid out of your brain. So the problem, of course, and there's also a lot of other good data suggesting that if you have obstructive sleep apnea, you're at higher risk for developing cognitive impairment and higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. The problem, of course, is how do we make sleep better? And we know that the medications that physicians typically prescribe to help sleep better are actually very bad for the brain, and these are things like benzodiazepines and, God forbid, atypical antipsychotic drugs. We also know, as we just heard a little while ago, that the drugs that most of our patients take over the counter in terms of their medications, which all contain drugs like Gravol and dimenhydrinate and diphenhydramine, are also terrible for cognitive impairment. So medications don't work. My colleagues who are sleep medicine specialists struggle mightily with elderly patients to wear CPAP because the masks are so difficult for many of our older individuals to use. So all of the sort of traditional medical models to help improve sleep are very problematic. So we're ending up again with a brain healthy lifestyle, exercise, natural light during the day. And these are hard things to do for many older individuals, like natural light. If you are a shut-in, how are you going to get natural light if you're an older individual that has, significant medical problems? But the bottom line is, to answer your question, yes, sleep, very important.
Thank you. Other questions?
Doctor, you mentioned in your talk on Alzheimer's that hearing and sight are an important factor. When I was being tested for my hearing aids, the audiologist told me, or one of the audiologists just told me, that if you don't hear in an ear, the brain, part of the brain that's connected to that loses its linguistic ability and it has to be reconstructed. Is this so?
So again, as I was mentioning in my talk, there is increasingly good data looking at the connection between hearing and memory difficulties. And what the audiologist said is one of the prevailing theories, that it's not only do people with hearing problems, if they can't hear, they can't remember, but it's also that if you're not getting input through your ears and the connections between your ears and the brain, the part of the brain that deals with things like memory, concentration, things like that, begins to decay because it's not getting enough stimulus from things like your hearing and your vision. So there's a multiplicity of reasons why people with hearing impairments are going to have difficulties with their memory and increasing and puts them at increased risk for developing dementias and Alzheimer's disease. So your audiologist is correct.
Great.
Absolutely. I do agree with the statements that you've made. So I think Dr. Sinha had made some reference to the ISAR screening tool, and that's being used more commonly. And when I was doing some work for my master's program, was looking into some of the other screening tools that were used. Looking at the systematic reviews, there's a lot of mixed results on which tools are effective and which tools are not as effective. So I can't really give a lot of, I know that the ISAR was the most effective tool that is being used in the emergency room, and it's pretty efficient and can be done within a few minutes. And as for your research-directed question, absolutely, even when we devised this urgent clinic at McMaster, it certainly wasn't easy, but because we had more geriatricians, everybody picked a date and everybody was able to supervise the clinic. But you're absolutely right. We really need to focus, doing research in local, smaller community practices where people do wear more than one hat. I'm going to bring that feedback back to our group and see maybe if we can even do a subset or some research project that's kind of getting some based on that, loosely based on our project there, and seeing if we can bring it here even.
That's great. I saw my mother in the crowd saying, "I told you so," when Dr. Herman and team said sleep more. So I thought that was kind of, I'm in for that a little bit later now. So I think one thing I wanted to comment on, we kind of was lost in the shuffle when we were going through the posters, was that there's going to be a short demonstration on McMaster's Optimal Aging Portal, which is a trusted source for healthy aging information. This is down in the Foundation office, so after we conclude here, you're invited to go down to see that. There's going to be a station where Kara A. Surud from McMaster's Optimal Aging Portal will be set up to provide information about the benefits and logistics of the portal and help anyone interested in signing up. So just wanted to make sure that we highlighted that. In addition, there's evaluation forums and there's a draw, prizes. So make sure that please put your, yes, thank you. So that's awesome. That's great. I love that. And so please make sure that we put that in the draw, and you'll be contacted with regards to that. In addition, you have up on the screen, we have our plug for next year, Wednesday, June the 19th, 2019. Our focus is going to be on cancer. And we started off this session with a thanks. I'd like to end this session with a thanks. And again, our partners that were involved, the Collingwood General Marine Hospital, the Collingwood Town of Collingwood. I see Martin in the back there. We have Georgian College, Cindy and team. We have the Rural Ontario Medical Program. We have Dr. Wells. We have the numerous students. Again, the students, they really are the engines behind getting all of this done, and they are really fantastic. The posters that are in the hallway, please go see those posters. We've had people. We have Dr. Tony Sanfilippo, the Dean of Undergraduate Medicine from Queen's, who come up just to see his students. I know Dan Wiedek, he's going to kill me for bringing his name up. Queen's clerk here did a poster, and your Dean is here to see it. Isn't that fantastic? And most importantly, again, thanks to Michelle Hunter. She is fantastic and has really facilitated and organized all of this. So thank you so much. Great. Thank you all. Have a lovely day. Enjoy the posters.